I was a freshman in high school when I first read Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. I was immediately enthralled. The adventures of the band of hobbits, elves, and dwarfs caught me up, and in those days, long before the internet, I needed a way to display my fandom, and that mostly took the form of t-shirts. I had a t-shirt that said, "Welcome to Middle-earth," one that read, "Frodo lives," and one that said, "I'd rather be a hobbit." But my very favorite didn't have any words at all. It just had an image of my favorite character, Gandalf, the gray-robed wizard who always showed up just in the nick of time to rescue the adventurers from balrogs and orcs and natural disasters. Well, 25 years later, I was in the midst of a midlife crisis, which I had decided to handle by taking 9 months off from work and traveling in Africa. Not having slept a night in a tent any time in my life, I signed up for a 3-month overland truck trip with camping every night, often in the rain. I loved it. At the end of those 3 months, I found myself in Cape Town, South Africa, and I had no particular plans for the next 6 weeks. One night, a couple showed up at the hostel I was staying at, and they were raving about the town they'd just come from, a place called Hogsback in the Amatola Mountains. I looked it up in Lonely Planet, and there was just one sentence about Hogsback and barely a paragraph about the Amatola Mountains, which made it sound really promising because it wouldn't be overrun with lots of backpackers. They had given me a copy of a little booklet called The Pocket Guide to Hogsback, and it explained everything about Hogsback, how to get there and what there was to do when you did get there. And also it had this intriguing bit of information. It claimed that Hogsback was the town that had inspired Tolkien to write The Lord of the Rings. Now, Lonely Planet had a little boxed information bit about Tolkien, and it said that despite the popular South African graffiti, that he was just another Bloemfontein boy on drugs. He had actually left South Africa when he was 3 and never come back. So I found this information rather dubious, but it still seemed like a promising place to go. Well, according to the Pocket Guide to Hogsback, the way to get there was to first go to the town of East London, and then a couple of times a week there was a shuttle that would go up to Hogsback. Well, East London was easy enough to get to, and it proved to be a typical coastal South African town, which meant it was full of Australian surfers who spent their whole day surfing and their whole nights partying. I had to wait a couple of days for the shuttle, so I hung out with the Aussie guys who were about 20 years younger than me, and it was great. I slept during the day while they were surfing and went to the club at night. Traveling sometimes can be really difficult. Well, the shuttle proved to be a decrepit pickup truck driven by 2 Irish guys, and it had to be pushed any time that we stopped. And we had a couple of stops on the way, one in Cinsa to pick up more passengers, and one in King Williamstown for grocery shopping, and very importantly, to go to the last bottle shop before you got to Hogsback, because there were no liquor stores in Hogsback. In fact, there wasn't much of anything in Hogsback. There was one hotel, the hostel I was going to, a coffee shop that was only open a couple of days a week, and a couple of gift shops that were straight out of the 1970s, filled with macrame plant hangers and tie-dye t-shirts, and because this was, after all, South Africa, decorated ostrich eggs. But the hostel was an amazing place. It was called Away with the Fairies, and it was run by this tall, thin man whose long blonde hair could very well have concealed the pointed ears of an elf. Instead of the steel industrial bunk beds that most hostels had, Away with the Fairies had comfortable double beds, and instead of scratchy wool blankets, There were soft, fluffy comforters for every bed, and the walls were decorated with murals of castles and dragons. The generator was turned off promptly at 10 every night, but everybody gathered in the living room where there was a fireplace and a roaring fire, while the Irish guys, when they were there, played the guitar, while everybody drank beer and listened to them sing and tell stories of leprechauns and Irish politics. Now, the main thing to do in Hogg's Back is to hike in the mountains. And this area, if you look at what it's like, it's a lot like New England in the fall. And this was May, so it was the fall in the southern hemisphere. There were beautiful, brightly colored trees and lots of places in the mountains to walk. And the pocket guide to Hogg's Back had great maps of all of the trails. It also had a rather curious warning on the cover. It said that the mountains were infested with pixies. And the only thing to do if you're being pixie-led is to take off your jacket and turn it inside out and put it back on. Well, I thought that was kind of interesting, but I didn't anticipate needing that information. I decided to start with the shortest and easiest hike, which was to 39 Steps Falls. That required finding the end of Oak Avenue and looking for a trail sign. Well, finding the end of Oak Avenue really only took finding the beginning of Oak Avenue, because the whole street was about 30 feet long. And I didn't find the trail sign, which was supposed to be a yellow pig with a green dot on it, but I could hear the sound of the waterfall, and I could follow the sound of the fall to get to the right trail. And before long, I was there at 39 Steps Falls. That increased my confidence immensely, and I flipped through the pocket guide looking for what other hike I could do. The contour path was described as being a relatively relaxing 1-hour hike, and I thought that was something that I was up for. It said that it started at the end of the Arboretum, and the Arboretum was marked. Once I got to the Arboretum, I didn't see any obvious trail signs, but there was a tree that looked like one of its branches was pointing in a particular direction. And I thought that seemed like a reasonable approach. And before long, I did get to a trailhead that had 3 signs. Well, the pocket guide said the contour path had a sign that was a brown pig with a green dot. The 3 signs I saw were all white pigs, one with a red dot, one with a yellow dot, and one with a blue dot. But lacking anything better, I told myself, well, I'm a storyteller. I should follow the 3 little pigs. So I went off down that route. That worked fine for a while, until I got to a place where the 3 signs went in different directions. Well, one of them went straight uphill, and I immediately ruled that one out just on the grounds that I didn't want to walk up a steep hill. But there was nothing to choose between the other 2. I finally told myself, well, I'm a liberal. This is a liberal part of the country. I should take the path that goes to the left. So I walked off towards the left, and I continued down that path for about 45 minutes. It got a bit rougher and much muddier, and I wasn't entirely sure I was on the right path, so I started getting a bit nervous. Well, I told myself, well, pigs think mud is relaxing, so it's probably the right path, but I still felt a little bit uncomfortable. And then suddenly it occurred to me. I was hiking alone, which is not really the smartest thing to do, and beyond that, I was hiking alone in Africa. And as I'd learned over the previous months, there are lots of animals in Africa. And I began to imagine that every tree I saw held a jaguar, a tiger, a bear, which was really interesting because none of those live in Africa. And then I started worrying about what if I slipped and fell down and broke my ankle and I'd end up being eaten by some sort of creatures. And I got more and more nervous, but I had walked for 45 minutes, and it said it was an hour-long walk, so it didn't seem to make a lot of sense to turn back. Just as I was getting really nervous and shaky, suddenly, with no sound whatsoever, there was a man standing right in front of me. A tall man with a long white beard and long white hair. And I swear, there had not been any sound of footsteps. He was just suddenly there. I asked him if this was the contour path, and he confirmed it was, and then he walked away. And as I turned and looked at him, I could swear I heard just the faintest rustling of gray robes as he walked further down the path. Before long, I did end up at the end of the contour path with Kettlespout Falls above me and the blue roofs of the part of town called Hobbiton below. And soon I was at the road which would take me back to town. I came back to the hostel. I tore up the pocket guide to Hogsback, which had obviously been written by pixies. And the rest of the week that I spent there, I hiked confidently, knowing that if I got really lost, Gandalf would show up to save me. Now, when people ask me where they should go when they go to South Africa, sometimes I tell them they should go to Hogsback. But sometimes, if they're the right type of person, I suggest they might want to go to Middle Earth. Thank you.